Here's this reading from Ruth chapter 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to live in the country of Moab, he and his wife and 2 sons. The name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi. And the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem in Judah. They went into the country of Moab and remained there. But Elimelech, the husband of Naomi, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. These took Moabite wives. The name of one was Orpah, the name of the other was Ruth. When they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, so that the woman was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Then she started to return with her daughters-in-law from the country of Moab, for she had heard in the country of Moab that the Lord had considered his people back home and given them food. So she set out from the place where she had been living, she and her 2 daughters-in-law, and they went on their way to go back to the land of Judah. But Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. May the Lord deal kindly with you as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find security, each of you, in the house of your husband." And then she kissed them. Oh, and they wept aloud. They said to her, "No, we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Do I still have sons in my womb that they may become your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go your way, for I am too old to have a husband. Even if I thought there was hope for me, even if I should have a husband tonight and bear sons, would you then wait until they were grown? Would you then refrain from marrying? No, my daughters, it has been far more bitter for me than for you, because the hand of the Lord has turned against me." Then they wept aloud again. Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. So she said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and to their gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. This is the word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Have you noticed that the world is full of average people, but hardly anybody notices? They rarely get their pictures in the paper. The crooks do. The mugshots are there for all to see. The terrorists and embezzlers and the villains. And the heroes do. The firefighter who rescues a child from a burning building, or the athlete who visits the hospital ward, the best-selling author or the musician whose hits are everywhere, the best-looking actor, the valedictorian. The best and worst of us get our pictures in the media. Sometimes it's hard to tell the crooks from the heroes, but the vast majority of us are neither. We're just getting by. No better or worse looking than anyone else, more C's than F's or A's. We haven't done anything particularly extraordinary, nor won big awards or trophies, or made keynote speeches. We haven't had the good fortune to win $1 million, but we also haven't been so far deep in debt that we couldn't get out. Like I said, we're average and not particularly newsworthy. And we're okay about it. Hey, life is good. Full of surprises, And if not, then we're copacetic. Average folk make the world go round because it kind of balances things out. In fact, we are good people, decent human beings, regular Joes and regular Josephines who may never be honored or rewarded or even remembered for anything extraordinary. But we do try to do the right thing, whether anybody notices or not. In school, we fulfilled all the requirements, but rarely went for extra credit. And in life itself, we're not looking for credit. We're just trying to live with a clear conscience. And our patron saint is named Orpah, not to be confused with Oprah, whose mother apparently misspelled Orpah. Oprah is the patron saint of famousness. The rest of us are the patron saints of average Orpahs. Now, speaking of names, have you ever noticed that women are still named Ruth these days, like Ruth Allstott? I've never met a Naomi, but I know they exist. There's Naomi Judd, who's famous. But have you ever met a woman named Orpah? No, her name has pretty much been retired. Kind of like Herod or Pontius Pilate. Who names a child that these days? Orpah was a good enough person. Her name is in the Bible, after all, mentioned twice. They didn't name a whole book after her, though. And as far as I know, there's no song of Orpah. I've heard church choirs sing the Song of Ruth. It's beautiful. But who would write a song for Orpah? Who writes songs about average folk who do as they're told and fulfill all the requirements? I'm not a songwriter, and I don't play one on television. But imagine what Orpah's song might sound like. We could start with what we know for sure about Orpah. She was a woman of Moab. See, right away we've got a problem trying to rhyme something with Moab. You know, Joab, but where are you going to go with that? Her country was one of those oppressed by Israel, or that one of those that oppressed Israel in the generations of the judges. That's how the book begins. She probably didn't have very much knowledge of the politics that was going on around her, but she probably knew enough to know that Israel considered her country outside, very outside the covenant. And even apostate, although that's not exactly the right word to use here. Someone is called the Moabites the Edsels of the Semitic world. If you don't know what an Edsel is, ask your grandfather. Nonetheless, when the famine hit Israel and nearby Moab somehow escaped it, many from Israel were desperate enough to kind of put differences aside and cross into Moab to find daily bread. Orpah and the Moabite women got involved with some of those refugees. Some came from a city called Bethlehem, which is kind of ironic because Bethlehem means house of bread. But apparently during the famine, it was the house of the breadless. And so these people moved to Moab to find sustenance, life. And that's what we know about Orpah, except that she did marry this Israelite named Chilion, one of the two sons of Naomi, and her late husband, Elimelech. Now, within 10 years, the men were dead. Orpah was, I knew I was going to do that. Orpah was a widow. Sadly, sister-in-law Ruth had also lost her husband, Mahlon. So the song I'm trying to write about Orpah will be full of melancholy. In fact, it'll be quite an unhappy song. Orpah's song will have notes of desperation and notes of fear. She finds herself with no one to support her, no present means of support, no hope for the future either. Naomi and Ruth and Orpah are all left on their own in a culture where a woman's only source of security and value was marriage and sons. These women had no husbands, they had no father-in-law, and they had no sons to take care of them. We can assume that these three women, therefore, grew extraordinarily close to one another for support. They grew close in order to just survive together, with the younger two leaning, of course, on the older and wiser Naomi. So this is going to be an odd song. Have you ever heard a song about a mother-in-law and her daughters-in-law that sang of such devotion to one another and such determination to survive together? Once we've gotten past, though, the first couple of verses that might be a little bit gloomy on the ballad side, the story does take a more hopeful turn. The Lord has smiled on Naomi's homeland, and crops are flourishing again. Things are turning green, the plants are coming up, the cattle are growing fat. Maybe there's even the promise of milk and honey. If she can go home, she'll still be at risk, certainly, but at least she won't be a foreigner as she is at risk in Moab. Orpah's heart sinks when she hears the news that Naomi is bound for home. She faces a harrowing decision. If Naomi leaves for Judah and Orpah and Ruth stay in their own homeland, they're going to lose their anchor. If they go with her, they can hold on to the only connection they have with their late husbands, but they'll also realistically be poverty-stricken, vulnerable, and now aliens in a strange land, too. Now, how much it mattered, we don't know, but Ruth and Orpah will also leave their God behind. And they'll live in a land with a strange God they do not know, perhaps always being reminded, you two are not part of the covenant, you know. Orpah's song could sing of the moment that she made the decision to follow Naomi. Her sister-in-law Ruth is coming too, and now we have the song of hopeful expectation, maybe a little more bounce to the beat. It's not necessarily a better life that awaits them, but at least it's life with Naomi. And there's comfort there too, and continuity, and a sense of family if the three can stay together. Orpah and Ruth bid goodbye to their friends, they pack up their few belongings, and they set out on this journey with Naomi on the way to Judah. Naomi's quiet as they go, as if she's having second thoughts about the whole thing. The lyric to our song of Orpah might even admit that there's no evidence that Naomi ever invited them along. Perhaps she thought all along that they'd be better off staying in their own country. Maybe she'd even thought it would be easier for her if they stayed in their own country. Whatever her motivation, Naomi's words come as a jolt, an astonishing blow to these two women. Go back, she finally says to them. Turn around and go back. Go back, each of you, to your mother's house. How abrupt it is as we read the story in the scriptures. And it's not a suggestion, it's an order. Common sense said it would be more prudent to stay with their own families, in their childhood homes, in their own country, under their own God. They weren't too old to begin again. Maybe find new husbands and finally find a sense of security that would surely elude them if they continued on to Judah with their mother-in-law. Now, with this order, go back, came her benediction. A warm benediction, a blessing. And these are wonderful words. May the Lord deal kindly with you, she says, just as you have faithfully loved me all these years, and as you've loved your husbands, my sons. May the Lord grant you happy security of another husband. And then she kissed them. And they were all overcome with emotion. They wept. Through her tears, Orpah and Ruth protested, saying, no, we're going to return with you to your people. So Naomi turns to reasoning now, moving from blessing to a kind of caustic, turn back, my daughters. Why come with me? I can do nothing for you. Even if I found a husband tonight and had children, for crying out loud, what are you going to do? Wait for them to all grow up so you can get married again, so you can find protection and welfare? Orpah hears in Naomi's voice not only anger, but frustration more, and bitterness. And Naomi admits it. She has lost her husband, she's lost her two sons, and now she has to push her daughters-in-law back for their own good. And she sees all of this as the hand of God against her. The tears flow. They embrace one another. Orpah kisses Naomi goodbye and pulls away. Her song suddenly fades out. The last line is sung. The music ends before we realize that it's over. Orpah does as she is told. She does what's required of her. The woman she respects most has told her what to do. And in trusting obedience, she does it. Mother-in-law knows best. So Orpah turns back, heads home, and we never hear from her again. No one has named a book after her. No one has sung a song about her. No one's named a baby after her. But she wasn't a bad person. She took Naomi at her word. What her beloved mother-in-law said made perfect sense. Orpah did the prudent thing. Not the heroic thing, but not the cowardly thing. She just did what the average person would do. And no one paid any attention to her after she took her leave and went home. Oh, I hope she did go back and find her mother's house, and I hope there was a handsome George Clooney-esque man she bumped into at the marketplace. I hope she did marry again. I hope she was no longer barren, but had a few children to love her with all their heart. But we don't know. We do know what happened to Ruth, though. She disobeyed her mother-in-law and became the hero of the story. They named the book after her. And even her words, the song of Ruth, sung at weddings and church services. Even when Naomi pointed out Orpah as the good example to follow, see, your sister-in-law has done what I said. She's gone back. You follow her home. Even then, Ruth said, don't press me to leave you. And then she sang her song. And as I mentioned to Crosby and Benjamin and Nathan, when the song is printed in many Bibles, it's set in verse, not in the text that we would find in a narrative. Whither thou goest, I will go. The Revised English Bible says, where you go, I shall go. Where you stay, I shall stay. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. Where you die, I shall die. I solemnly declare before the Lord that nothing but death will part me from you. Does it sound like a wedding? Sure, because lots of couples have chosen those words for their weddings. It's inappropriate, but it's no surprise. And the reason it's inappropriate for a wedding is because in the context of the wedding ceremony, we lose the original and the wider context of the meaning of the story. It's a story of loyalty, yes. It's a story of loving commitment, yes, and risk, yeah. Yet the fact is that this vow is one-sided. Ruth takes the vow. Naomi doesn't. Indeed, the scriptures say that she has nothing to say after Ruth's beautiful words. In her bitterness and her emptiness, she never acknowledges Ruth's loyalty. Some have supposed that Naomi wasn't that thrilled that Ruth was going to stay with her. Apart from the popular context of the wedding vows, then, why are Ruth's words so memorable? For one thing, Ruth is making a commitment that goes beyond what was required. Orpah was the C student, the good daughter-in-law who did what was expected. Orpah's action was merely commendable. But Ruth's action is understood over the generations as an extraordinary vow. To go with, to stand with, to be with, to struggle with, to overcome with Naomi, whom she loved. No matter the odds or the outcome, Ruth intends to share Naomi's future. And to do that, she must give up her own past and present, leaving behind the family of her birth, her homeland, her culture, that God over there. Remember Naomi's blessing on her 2 daughters. May the Lord deal kindly with you, just as you have faithfully loved me all these years. The Hebrew word for this, and Pat would say it so much better than I, this word for dealing kindly and loving faithfully is chesed. It is to the Old Testament what the word agape is to the New Testament. In her promise to give up her life to Naomi, Ruth is expressing hesed, her faithfulness born of caring and commitment. Presumably, having lived with an Israelite family for some 10 years, Ruth has learned the meaning of hesed, if not in word, then in deed, and understands both Naomi's blessing as well as the blessing that her life might be to this older woman as she returns with her to her home and an uncertain future. Hesed is a powerful motivator. An example of unhesed. Yesterday, Joan and I went to see a film of a play that was presented at the Cornerstone Church. The play is called Don't Cry, Mama, and it's about domestic violence. And as we watched this unfold, this play performed on a stage at a church, and now we're sitting in the theater watching the play unfold. We're seeing this family torn apart by an abusive, alcoholic husband. And when he slaps one of the actors, you flinch. And at the end, when a gun is pulled out in an ultimate act of violence, this is unhesed. At the end of the film, we all went downstairs to the party room where there was a reception and a talkback session. And that's where we saw hesed take heart and grow as a desert might bloom again. We learned that this melodramatic story we were watching was a true story. And there were women in the room whose lives were portrayed in the play. And they told their stories. And as they went from table to table and people shared their reflections on what could be done about domestic violence, people would get their words caught in their throats. And so this man got up from the table and went and stood with his wife as the second husband. And as someone next to Joan began to tell her story and couldn't go much further, Joan's hand went around the stranger to comfort her, and others comforted as tears flowed and stories came out of deep, deep loving kindness for strangers. Among the lessons we glean from the story of Ruth is the need for all people of faith to put aside their cultural and their theological differences and make God's loving kindness the center of all that we do. Not to deny our traditions or abandon our beliefs, but to make loving servanthood the keystone of our response to God's mercy in our lives and to go beyond what the world expects of us. To move well ahead of what's average and to do the extraordinary in times when many folks only do what they have to do just to get by. And to be with one another, to tell stories, to notice what's going on in people's lives in order for us to hug them, put an arm around them, and shed tears with them. In the life of the church, it means holding on to our own vows of faithfulness, of baptism and church membership. Just as Ruth follows and commits herself to Naomi, so the disciples in the New Testament were the same devotion and loyalty of following Jesus. And we are the disciples. May God keep Ruth's words in our hearts as we follow Jesus wherever he goes, wherever he leads, and then sit with folks from so many different cultures around one table where we will share the cup of life together. And now I want to circle back to the beginning of this reflection, this meditation. I want to claim my own averageness. I want to offer my mediocrity to the redeemed, to be redeemed by the grace of God. I want to open myself to God's transforming love, giving thanks to God for Ruth, but also for my sister Orpah. Who would sing a song for her? Chris would. Would you come and share this song that, on the spur of the moment, I asked you to write?
Widowed but not alone, with Ruth and Naomi at her side, turning away from the life she has known, her God, her land, her people. Widowed but not alone, called to Naomi's former land, hoping that a new life awaits with her God, her land, her people. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to Naomi. May the Lord grant you rest. May the Lord grant you rest. Turn back to your mother's home. Widowed and all alone, told by Naomi to return, turning away from her mother-in-law and back to her people. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to Naomi. May the Lord grant you rest. May the Lord grant you rest. Turn back to your mother's home. Orpah wept with Ruth and Naomi, then kissed Naomi goodbye. Look, said Naomi, she has gone back to her home. You should do the same. Widowed but not alone, return to the land of her birth, turning away from the sorrow of the past and building a new life. May the Lord show you kindness as you have shown kindness to Naomi. May the Lord grant you rest. May the Lord grant you rest. Turn back to your mother's home.